everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Yeah, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here on Black Liberation Media. Greetings, good morning to you. I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Come on in, as Ear Doctor already said, and salute to him. Share, like, all that. Hope everybody's doing relatively well. Um, so we're gonna hang out, hang out for a little bit this morning. Got a couple things, and try to hold it down here for a Monday morning for your winter solstice, getting ready to move into the winter solstice here. Holiday celebrations and all of that. Uh I will start. I didn't even think I would do this, but it does kind of fit with the theme. I mentioned the other morning that I did sit through Tyler Perry's new Netflix film. And I am reminded of first of all, I'm reminded of the trauma I still went through that a couple years ago, co-authoring a journal article on Tyler Perry and the Mantan Manifesto. Yeah, it's finally cold out here too. Salute to you. I mean, I know it must be a mess out there. Do you know I still to this day can remember that bus ride leaving boot camp? So this would have been right around this time of year in leaving Great Lakes, Illinois. And even this is 30 years ago or something like that at this point, and I still am traumatized by that. Yeah, we do need Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, but I don't even think he would. Has he even ever seen a Tyler Perry film? Based on our email group, I know he's very much focused on the Diddy trial or case or whatever, which is a little bit funny. But I don't even know. I have to ask Dr. Burrows if he's even seen a Tyler Perry film. I don't think he does that kind of quote unquote low brow. We watched 688 last night. Tyler Perry must be stopped. I mean, so it's bad. It's bad. And that that it's bad under the guise of producing something that's meant to be for the race. Kind of makes it worse because it does tap into, again, the general broad-based desire to be seen, wanting to be recognized. I think it also taps into the backlash against Pan-Africanism and soda, that is the solidarity of dispersed Africans, in that it's also meant to be another one of those "we built this country, it's ours too" type of things. and which is on the one hand understandable, logical. On another, it's again, I think, needs to be seen in the context of a desire to bring Black people here solely within this thing. So there's a couple of allusions to, yeah, I'm not even, yeah, I don't think you need to bring yourself to see it. I don't want people to see this. This is not even a, I said the other day, it's not even like a Vernon philosophy. It's, the Vernon philosophy is meant to be a reminder when we're drawn to things. This isn't even something I was particularly drawn to. A couple people asked if I would see it, and then I did. I don't know what I was thinking, but I watched it on 1.5 times speed. uh, and uh, But as I said, so I said in my notes here, is this new valorized Black people who want to become America while demeaning or ignoring radical traditions? So of course, Oprah Winfrey comes in here to play Mary McLeod Bethune, but only as the thinnest of cameos, meant to quickly remind us of Bethune's friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was played in cameo by Susan Sarandon, and then as also a reminder in this version of Bethune, and I don't know Bethune's history very well, to show her as I forgot what Oprah's line is, but the line is something again like we did this, we've been here doing this work, so honor us, and we're you know wanting to become part of America. Which again, I get it. It's I understand the logic, given the history, all of that. But the question for me is why this story? Why this framing on this story of all the stories that could be told about World War II, about Black people's participation in that war, or just more broadly, all of the people who in movements within Black history, just in the United States, for these to be the stories we get, is, I think, indicative of this kind of attempt to make conservative and flattened and desirous of being an American that history. It's um so then I copied a couple of notes here from, where did I get this? Where it said the 6888 was created in 1944 in response to pressure from African American organizations to allow Black women in the WAC to serve overseas. The unit was organized in Birmingham, England, in 1945, and was led by Major Charity Adams, who was portrayed by Kerry Washington. It's described as a success because the 6888 was given 6 months to complete the mission, but they finished in 3. They sorted and redirected an average of 65,000 pieces of mail per day, totaling nearly 7 million pieces in Birmingham alone. The significance is that the 6888 boosted morale among American service members, U.S. government personnel, and Red Cross workers in Europe. Their story is also a testament to the resilience and perseverance in the face of racial and gender inequality. Like what it would be interesting, even that film Spike Lee did about Black soldiers in fighting in Italy during World War II. No political masterpiece by any means, but it still was more of an attempt to bring some life to Black people's contributions. That was told beyond. I mean, it starts with an assassination. The white man getting shot in the face, which is pretty funny. But the so you could see, even relative to Tyler Perry, again, relatively speaking, Spike Lee he's at least, you can see him trying to do something other than, hey, we're American too type of thing. But there's so many stories you could tell, and I'm thinking, I remember years ago reading one of those good European contributions to African history, Basil Davidson, in modern Africa. He wrote hundreds of thousands of Africans fought in World War II on behalf of their colonial uh, powers. Wouldn't it have what even if it was completely made up, wouldn't it have been dope to see Black American soldiers interacting with continental Africans and maybe all comparing how when convenient they're all dragged into to various elements of the war by by their colonizers. I don't know. There's so many things you could do. But of course, they're not able to. They're not allowed to. There wouldn't be Netflix deals and Atlanta complexes for film studios. There wouldn't be all of these white audiences, which is a theme this morning we're going to come back to. Uh, this contradiction that all popular culture in this country is based on, well, obviously the desires of mostly white affluent consumers, or what is meant to be the desires of white and affluent consumers, even when and especially when that pop art or culture is the creation of the colonized. But oh, right, I said I wrote it down. Right, Oprah's line was part of our American democracy. I actually wrote it down. There it is. So that was her line. That was what Oprah's point and why she would, of course, want to be involved with that. Then, of course, this whole plot line, and I did actually look up a couple of articles, and I didn't see much at all about this romance that the lead character is meant to have had with this white man and a Jew that starts off the film and then plays itself out throughout the film as we're shown. And it is true that and I forgot the woman's name, Lena. But this black woman's family did work for this Jewish family in Alabama. So again, we don't get the dynamics of that. And as a result, they do it. There's acknowledged that there was some at least friendship that struck up. Now, of course, we could all, suspect what that means, but there's nothing that I didn't find anything that was written that suggested that this was enormously meaningful beyond the fact that he does go off to war, he gets killed, shot down as a pilot, and it does inspire her to join. I did read somewhere that part is apparently true. Now, were they headed towards marriage? Was it some star-crossed love affair? Was it some never got anywhere love affair? He says in the film he's going to promise to come back and marry her. I don't know. I didn't find any. But the point is, cinematically, it's used as a device, not only as a reminder of really, it's meant to be used as a device to show that particularly in the hands of Tyler Perry, that this is uh, a good wanting to be American, and the kind of did you all see the interplay in the film between the lead character's mother and her sister or girlfriend or whoever who was just depicted as you would expect Tyler Perry to depict a Southern black woman of low resource who I don't know. It was just I just did it was I don't it was some backwards kind of I don't know. But I didn't really but anyway, but she of course is used as the foil or is meant to be the voice of the black community, discouraging of any sort of, don't date the white boy, which is, probably logical. Don't go to war. But she's meant to be depicted as the backwards thinking, meant to be overcome black community that this lead character's family and role are meant to demonstrate is a positive break from. She wants the white man. She wants to go to serve her country. She becomes this, she uses the reappearance of this dead white man's ghost to inspire her through boot camp and inspire her to push through. And it's so much so that it's depicted in the film that when she starts, you see her meet her black husband, and then you see eventually that there's maybe one scene where he of course has to be shown as having to be leaving another woman before coming to this woman. So it's always like this Tyler Perry thing of, all right, I know you're going to end up with the black man, but we have to show that he's the flawed person that you eventually end up with, whereas the dead white man who died as a perfect figure and will always be remembered as perfect is perfect. uh so it was just weird. It was, we don't actually, like, there's no character development, there's no history, and then the movie just sort of ends with her saying, oh yeah, and by the way, I married Harold. It's like, I truly pined for and missed this dead white man, but I did marry Harold, or whatever his name is. Oh, and then I made a note here that the way they introduce her Jewish boyfriend, he's standing up for her against the racist whites. So, and it's this old plot device, especially if you grew up watching a lot of this stuff in the 80s. This seemed to be, and I'm sure it's been written about, but this seemed to be sort of the 1980s type of, we're raising a new crop of black kids who are going to see the attempts to integrate, and the people who find the good white person is like, I don't know, it was very it reminded me of something from my youth, where we're meant to, it's like an after school special type of thing, where he stands up against the racists, and they develop some like football or pilot type of play language to juke around to get to the car, and then they just laugh and drive off together. But they don't really, there's no sex, there's no drinking. He's just this perfect, they're just this, and of course she waits, she's works staff at his family's parties, and then I mean, but anyway, so I wrote here, a Jew who upsets the whites as much as the black folks. So because you see him standing up to the whites. Now, there's no discussion of what it meant for him and his family to be Jews in southern Alabama, in the South in Alabama, and there's none of this is nothing. There's no nothing that could be depicted as, what would, there's nothing. It's just, he's the good white guy. And then right, and then typical of Tyler Perry, the black woman in her household, there's no black father. So I wrote here, no word from him versus the white man who went to war. So again, she wouldn't have, anyway, I don't know what happened in real life, but we of course we get a version, and it just so happens that the story we get, there's no black father. He's just gone. And the mother's friend or whatever has some little, she even says something like, at one point when the mail is coming, and the white man who goes off to war sends the letter to the daughter, the her mother's friend who's always hanging around, again meant to represent the low class black community, she says, out of nowhere, uh that white man barely been gone a month and already sending all these letters, where your man ran off for years and never heard from him. It's like, really? Really? That was necessary? He just left? That was it? Again, so we get that. We get the good white man, the absent black man, the black man she eventually marries is just faded, is the flawed, faded in the background. And then there's this line in there that I thought was there's a quick scene in there. I wrote it down that it says the suggestion is that she went to the military to get money for college. They have this back and forth with her mother where they're like, "Why are you doing this?" And why don't you go to college? And she says, "Because I can't afford it." Now they don't say specifically, "I'm going to go and use the GI Bill and come back and go to college," but it's left hanging there like she went there to get money so that she could go to college. And of course, they don't talk about any of the things that would have been very real about how black soldiers who went didn't get the GI Bill benefits. So it's like, well, if you're suggesting that she went into the military to get college money, she probably didn't get the college money. But you're not going to tell that because this is supposed to be a pro-American story. White Man Ghost is inspiration, and then of course we get the ending with Michelle Obama's speech, where in real life she dedicated something to these women. So it all comes back into these are the stories black people are meant to get to support. All right, so that was that. So yeah, I didn't even really, but I figured I'll just go through the notes as we get started here this morning. So as again, good morning, everybody. Oh, you're lost too. We're talking about the 6888 on Netflix. So Shirley, I did see. So you're saying that that romance was made up. The black soldier she met is the man she married and was married to for over 40 years. Why not highlight that love story? So I did read in one of these history blogs or whatever. They did say that they did acknowledge that the white man existed and that they were friends. He did go off and get killed, and that in one of the articles said that she was inspired to join the military because of him. I don't know, but you're right. The man that she ends up marrying and living with for 40 years, who was also there in the war, by the way, he was a soldier too. Uh, yeah, you don't have to rewind. Yeah, just stay lost, Zenzi. You know, but you know, yeah, we're talking about the Netflix joint, the 6888 Netflix joint. No, don't watch the movie. I honestly don't know why I usually ignore Tyler Perry stuff. A couple people asked me to watch it, but usually that wouldn't have been enough. I don't know what was happening. I don't know what was happening. But I should go get some therapy and find out what's going on in my life that would subconsciously work or consciously work to make me watch that because I can't stand it. But uh I mean it's bad too. And then it's not even he doesn't even make good movies that are just bad politically. Like he somehow can make decent actors come across worse, and he can certainly find people who are not great at acting. And he doesn't whoever's whether it's his scripts or his directing, he doesn't elicit or he doesn't you know, conjure up good performances in the people he's working with. It was just a mess. If we had socialism, no one would join the military. Actually, one, I don't agree with that. One, you could propagandize people into wanting to join, even in socialism. I don't agree with that at all. I don't know if you were joking. But then you could also just make it compulsory. You know, you just make them join. Uh, so, all right. Let me let me let me move on to what I really wanted to get to this morning. Um, and I guess I'll just go in this. So I'll start here. I can't wait to get into more of this book, and it comes off blurry. That I got from Mtume Gant. Shout out to Mtume Gant. His book is called Revolution in 35 Millimeter in Glorious Color. edited by Andrew Nett and Sam Dehan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But it's subtitled Political Violence and Resistance in Cinema from the Art House to the Grindhouse, 1960 to 1990. And it's a collection of articles, essays with the posters in them. It's beautifully done. I'm loving the book so far. And I've only read the intro in one of the chapters so far. So I'm looking forward to getting into more of this as we go on. But one, it's just a good reminder or introduction for those of us who haven't studied this, of how much film has actually been made in the world. And film outside of dominant studios, and films that have attempted to do things that the films we get encouraged to see don't do. So that's one important thing. But I did read the chapter by Michael Gonzalez. The first chapter I skipped to, I admit, was the chapter on the spook who sat by the door, titled "Louder Than a Bomb," on the spook who sat by the door. And I gotta get Gant on here to talk more about this. But there's a couple things that if you haven't read the book or seen the film, you should. And then if you have read the book or seen the film, you should definitely get this book and read what is said about it, because it goes into some of the history. It mentions some of the film legacy that this film comes out of, films that I have not seen and films that I have, like Uptight, which I would recommend people see as well, from 1968, where you can see Max Julian as the lead. Not, I guess this is a spoiler but it's worth it to spoil it. So I'm about to spoil the film. I'll just hesitate here for a second. If you want to pause and mute and come back or whatever, or skip this part if you're watching this later. But in the film Uptight, which, how do they describe it in here? Uptight was Dasson's, that is the filmmaker's, first post-blacklist production. This is someone who had been blacklisted during the Hollywood purges of communists. Though the film spent considerable time with Black Panther-esque rebels who called themselves the Committee, we never see the actual uprising. Still, that didn't stop the film, which was produced by Paramount Pictures, from being labeled un-American in the fear that it might encourage violence. Even during the film's production, the FBI dug into its content and the patriotism of the cast and crew. And it's interesting to read that, because I've said for years now, you see the film and you can see Max Julian die on camera as the lead character in the film at the end of the film, who was supposed to be a revolutionary. And then you see him reemerge a year or two later as the pimp. Why is his name just the Mac, of course. So you see cinematically what happens and is meant to be projected to happen in real life, and then you see cinematically what happens with the politics of popular film. You play a revolutionary leading a black revolution, you're killed, and then you're reborn on screen as a pimp. But the next line of the book, in an FBI report to the then governor of California, Ronald Reagan, who, say it with me, everyone, died during my wedding. It was written that the film, quote, can be expected to further racial discord and disorders in this country, end quote. And then it says here, years later, the same language would be used to try to discredit Spike Lee's masterwork, Do the Right Thing, but those barbs came from film critics as opposed to government agency. What I like what Gonzalez is doing there is a couple of things. One, he's showing clearly the politics of popular culture and how, from the perspective of those in power, media are meant to play a colonizing, suppressive function. So this idea that it's just entertainment, you're doing too much, is again exploded, pun intended, in this book. The other thing he's doing is that he shows that is Gonzalez, by making that point about what was attempted to be done to Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, was to show that whether it's some sort of official COINTELPRO style operation, or just again the primary function of journalism and media within a colony, the journalism does the same thing that the intelligence agencies would want to do by demonizing the politics of a film that is threatening to a white affluent audience. This is why I've always been bothered when Spike Lee would come back a few years later after making the film 25th Hour. And I know it was in part to promote the film, but it bothered me that he needed to promote the film, even if it would be his claim as to why he was doing it, by at the time saying that this was always the film he was building his career to make. Not a horrible film, but just a film about a white dope dealer with his Latina girlfriend, and his decision that they kind of leave you thinking at the end of the film he might have made to escape or turn himself in to go to prison. Not a bad film. I'm not mad at it. But to say that this is the film you were building your career to make, like this is not improving upon Do the Right Thing and all those earlier, I mean, that bothered me. But again, it speaks to the desired role and function Blackness is meant to play in pop culture. That is, provide the spice that white audiences want to see. And once you upset them by going too far with the politics, racially or otherwise, no, 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 no. Now, so just go make a more or less routine gangster film. Become a black Scorsese. So I love that Gonzalez does all of that within just a couple of pages, and then he talks. And there's more in here about the how the film was made, shooting it guerrilla style, all this other kind of stuff, and it ends with a little bit of something that I remember hearing about. I hope it's died on a vine somewhere. That Lee Daniels had reportedly bought the rights to create the television series remake, and I heard at one point he was doing it in Baltimore for Netflix, and that would be a travesty because Lee Daniels, the butler and all that kind of stuff, is just politically tragic. So I would hate to see, and it reminds me of the hey, if you haven't seen it, please check out the Saturday Night Live I did the other night. Had a lot of fun, but it reminds me of the point I was making there, that when Dr. George Frazier starts his discussion at the Ron Daniels panel by referencing Kwame Ture while promoting an anti-Ture politics, that's the stuff that always bothers me. So it's people like George Frazier who don't have Ture's politics wrapping themselves in it to project a sort of militancy they don't have. And then here comes Lee Daniels, at least threatening by my estimation to take over and serialize the spook who sat by the door. What would that mean? Because even in that, the film, as is discussed here, it was done guerrilla style, meaning without sanction, no permits, with a certain politic that the filmmakers fought to maintain. And to the idea that it would be sanctioned, well funded, and given to Lee Daniels for Netflix is not a good thing. I was confused by Saturday Night Live Jay-Z title though. Were you? Well, one, I thought it worked out. I thought it worked out well because it was Saturday Night Live. It was Saturday for me night. 8 p.m. is night. It was live Saturday. and it started with a discussion of Jay-Z and his recent black capitalist mergering. So I thought it made perfect sense as a thumbnail. Anyway, that was my logic, at least. Yeah, okay, all right. But again, just one more quick shout out to Revolution in 35 millimeter. We'll get more into that as I continue reading it, and we get Mtume Gant on board for that. But see, I did tune in late. See, with the SNL logo. See, I'm trying to tell you, it was there. I made a couple slight edits, but it was basically their thumbnail from one of his previous performances. So no. He wasn't on recent. It wasn't recent. He wasn't on recent. All right. See, I be getting deep with the thumbnailing. Oh, damn, Shirley. You're supposed to click on it out of just GP. And it's not all about Jay-Z. I just did start there though. But you're not supposed to not click. You're supposed to click out of G. I just cuz. All right. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, I had reached out to Dr. Daphne Brooks to see if she'd be interested in talking with me about her class on Beyonce up there at Yale. And I went over that, read a couple things, and reached out to her, and she said she watched the video and was open to having a conversation. And then I said, as I like to, if there's anything you would want to ground the conversation and give me some homework and, something you've written previously, maybe, because I was saying that I wasn't seeing what good was meant to come out of this course. And I went back and we went through one of her more recent books and, raised some questions. So she said, well, she initially said, yeah. And she said, I would suggest going back to the Birmingham School of Cultural Studies in Stuart Hall. And I said, word, okay. I haven't read Stuart Hall in a while. When he was introduced to us in grad school, so I did have to go back and look this up just to jog my memory, because he was introduced to us as a leader of British cultural studies. That was the wing of theory that we were introduced to it, not the Birmingham School where he taught, but yeah, had been introduced to Hall, read a little bit of his work, watched a number of his lectures. At the time, I remember specifically really appreciating Hall because in the very Eurocentric white style, we were being taught communications theory and some of the history of the theory in the field. There was a lot missing. And when he brought in this decoding, encoding, and focus on the different cultural approaches to interpreting and constructing messages, I really dug it. I do always remember that there was some. I just had this vague memory of there being a couple, whatever it was. I just was not. Hall never became sort of a foundation for my own approach. I couldn't never really remember why. It just was, And I do remember at the time, also in grad school, when I was in Africana studies and around more of the African-centered folks, there was a lot of resistance to Hall's approach to culture and discussions of culture, and so anyway. But Professor Brooks said, "Why don't you read his classic, let's read his classic essay, What is the Black in Black Popular Culture? Published in Social Justice, 1993, volume 20, number 1, spring summer edition 93, pages 104 to 114. So I did. And I went back and reached out to Dr. Brooks, and we will see if my US exceptionalism maybe. No, but when I went back and read this, I was reminded of what may have been, because I remember I've read this, years ago. This was definitely one of the articles I read, and so but anyway, so I reached back out to Professor Brooks, and we'll see if in fact the discussion happens. But I thought I would at least start with it here, and at least some of my own thoughts, and then we'll see if she's able to join us, and so some of this, I admit, is over my head. I think it's very well written, but I just in some ways am not able to keep up with everything. So to the extent that I understand it, I see some areas where I disagree, and where perhaps Professor Brooks and I disagree in terms of how she is then approaching the topic of Beyonce. Um, so obviously we won't read the whole thing. I encourage people, if you can see here, I'm not going to make this available, not the JSTOR copy, because we know how JSTOR and them get down. And rest in peace, Aaron Schwartz, for alerting folks to the contradiction and being punished for it. So I don't want that smoke. So here's the citation. Hopefully folks can get a copy of it, but don't ask me, because I don't distribute JSTOR stuff judiciously. Judiciously. Straight up though, Aaron Schwartz though, that's wild though, that the distribution, the unsanctioned distribution of people's work that has been intellectually propertied by the ruling elite led him to being targeted by the state. That is just crazy. That's crazy. What sort of moment is this in which we pose the question of Black popular culture? That's where Stuart Hall started. He starts off praising a recent essay about, at the time, from Cornell West, which again reminded me of where I might have started to, and especially at the time in the 90s, in the early 90s, by the late 90s, when I'm coming out of grad school, I'm, if not fully, I'm entirely rocking with the African-centered world, and Cornell West, with all due respect, was not it. I was definitely on the team Dr. Clark. If folks remember that famous meeting, Cornell West and Dr. Clark, moderated by Dr. Greg Carr. Legendary. I was fully team Clark and Carr at the time. So, but it's interesting. He gets into a discussion of high and low culture and the role of but it's interesting because he doesn't. Where are my notes here? Because let's see. It's he. All right, I'll get to it. But there's nothing. The first thing I'll say is that there's nothing in here that properly understands, and this is where I would want to start with Professor Brooks. That there's nothing in this essay that acknowledges or properly contextualizes the colonial relationship or the function of media within a colony, and the role of pop culture within a colony. So Hall allows for this, and this is what I did appreciate in his encoding decoding piece. He allows for, quote, the agency, I'm using that word, not him, the agency of folks involved to make the pop cultural world a battleground, to have there be a push and pull. And he's critical in this essay of those of us, and I would put myself in that category, who do too much, as he would say, or in a better way, in his more expertly written way, who do too much in arguing that pop culture is a loss, a space that is just to be taken. It's just there's an L to be taken in that space, and he wants to give room for there to be a push and pull and a struggle that people like me just don't see as existing. I see the shift as becoming a more sophisticated form of colonial suppression. He's saying that movements force pop cultural environments to redefine themselves to be more accessible and open and diverse, and again a place where there can be some victory. And I don't, and again with the Vernon philosophy, I'm saying no, we shouldn't even be looking for victories, that there are no victories in that space. And when you think you've won something, you need to become more self-critical. So he's challenging people like me in that point. Let me add some qualifications to the general pictures, qualifications that, in my view, make the present moment a very distinctive one in which to ask the question about Black popular culture. First, I'll remind you of the ambiguities of that shift from Europe to America, since it includes America's ambivalent relationship to European high culture and the ambiguity of America's relationship to its own internal ethnic hierarchies. Western Europe did not have until recently any ethnicity at all, or didn't recognize it had any. America has always had a series of ethnicities, and consequently, the construction of ethnic hierarchies has always defined its cultural politics. And of course, silenced and unacknowledged the fact of American popular culture itself, which has always contained within it, whether silenced or not, Black American popular vernacular traditions. It may be hard to remember that when viewed from outside the United States, American mainstream popular culture has always involved certain traditions that could only be attributed to Black cultural vernacular traditions. So I'm with him here. Exactly. There is a specific cultural development and pop cultural development in this country that you cannot understand without it being associated with not only that popular culture involving certain traditions that only could be attributed to Black cultural vernacular traditions, but that have been specifically designed around the performance of Blackness that appeases white sensibilities. And I would argue that that as part of dealing with its enslaved population, where in Europe, again, their colonies were overseas. So at home, it didn't have the same development. But the need here to not only produce a pop culture that appeases white affluent audiences, uh, starting with, but that is used as a suppressive element of the internal colony of Black and Blackness. So that's a dynamic I don't think Hall addresses in this essay. That is the particular need and political use of projecting a popular form of Blackness that is both entertaining to whites and politically effective for whites in maintaining control over Black people. Uh, he says in this essay, it's impossible to refuse the global postmodern entirely insofar as it registers certain stylistic shifts in what I want to call the cultural dominant. Even if postmodernism is not a new cultural epoch, but only modernism in the streets, that in itself represents an important shifting of the terrain of culture toward popular practices, toward everyday practices, towards local narratives, towards the decentering of old hierarchies and the grand narratives. The decentering or displacement opens up new spaces of contestation and affects a momentous shift in the high culture of popular cultural relations, thus presenting us with a strategic and important opportunity for intervention in the popular cultural field. So a couple things here. So one, I don't think he acknowledges properly in this essay the development of pop culture in this country, which was developed specifically to create a high and low culture where the Hollywood and the world of entertainment that we now know of as and are taught to be shown to be run by, developed by, created by Jews, for instance, was left to Jews to create by the Gentile ruling elite, saying because the Gentile ruling elite didn't want to engage physically or otherwise culturally with the rabble, with the low class Eastern European, the lesser whites, and certainly the black and everybody else. So they were saying, we're going to keep our ballets and orchestras and operas to ourselves. And you Jews go out there and create vaudeville. And, starting with vaudeville, go out there. You can have your little Hollywood fantasy. You can do all of that, producing politically effective pop culture, but that targets the lower classes. So Hall is seeing, if I'm interpreting this correctly, Hall is seeing that development as leaving room for contestation and momentous shifts in popular cultural relations, but not in the context that I would see those shifts. Those are not shifts that are occurring because there's been some victory that society is acknowledging through inclusion. It's the dominant adjusting itself to symbolically, aesthetically, falsely include while further suppressing, extracting, exploiting, suppressing, dominating. It's a rebrand. It's a politically powerful rebrand, not some contested. So what we may feel like or see as a contestation is at best not producing the victory that people think it's producing, and at worst it's not recognizing what that shift is meant to do, that is ease and rebrand the existing hostilities and make them more palatable. And we must ask about the continuing silence within postmodernism shifting terrain, about whether the forms of licensing of the gaze that the proliferation of difference invites and allows at the same time as it disavows is not really, along with Benetton and the mixed male models of the face, a kind of difference that doesn't make a difference of any kind. So here I'm thinking, so I was like, are you coming back to agree with me and recognizing the difference that doesn't make a difference of any kind? Because that's what I think needs to be the focus, but it doesn't really become the focus of this essay. But this resolution is only a repression delayed into our political unconscious. The primitive returns uncannily at the moment of the apparent political eclipse. So he says something here that's very interesting, as I understood it, at least, that there needs to be a constant reminder of the primitive old culture as a way to justify what's happening now as something new and maybe rebranded and advanced. But again, this doesn't become the again, as I understood it, the focus of the essay, and it doesn't allow Hall to reach what I think is the more appropriate conclusion. So, okay, so when he says here, to remain within them, that is, so this is when he starts to talk about the essentialization, cultural essentialism, which is why I know he ended up in contradiction with the Afrocentrists, because African-centered folks are constantly being said to be essentialist in essentializing a traditional African culture and a European culture that are constantly in conflict and hostility with one another. Hall is seeing something very different happening here that is more of a contest, a shift, saying that there is no primitive, a perfect old, uh, uh, um, essential great norm that we should want to return to, and which is I've always argued has been a misunderstood piece of this critique with African centered or Afrocentrism. It's not Afrocentricity, as I've understood it, has never been a blind call to take anything positive, to say anything pre-colonial in Africa is good and therefore we should return to it without question. That's not what I've always understood them to be saying. They were saying that there are foundational there's a foundation of cultural difference in how we engage the world that evolved separately from those who evolved an engagement with the world coming out of ice ages and a hostile environment. Again, overly simplified, but in the same way that, again, I always liked Malefi Asante's point. In the same way, Europeans are encouraged to go back, not uncritically, but to always center themselves with Greece and Rome. Africans should do the same with Kemet. Again, it's not to say that there's nothing to be critiqued in Kemet or African cultures. It is to say that those core positives should be built upon and seen in contradistinction to what was evolved out of Europe. And then more specifically, to recognize that in the context of hostility between Europeans and Africans, culture and worldview become weaponized and hostile. And that which does not comport to European Eurocentric views is targeted. So, but Hall in this essay gets into some of that essentialism. But to remain within them is to be trapped in an endless either or, either total victory or total incorporation, which almost never happens in cultural politics, but with which cultural critics always put themselves to bed. So again, I don't agree with this. There, it, because this approach does deny and suppress the context I was just describing. In the context of colonialism and hostility, and the fact that media, particularly in the United States, has been evolved to serve that function, there is no partial victory. And there is a more of a tendency towards total incorporation. At least it needs to be understood that that is the goal. There is no popular culture, there's no sanctioned media that is intending to create a revolution. Whereas to the contrary, we do have, whether it's the evolving evidence around the Pentagon's involvement in script writing, in film production, whether it's the recognized communicative effect of false inclusion of just what I was looking at recently, including Black people in commercials and making Black people in hiring Black ad and marketing firms. All of this is done with the intent of manipulating Black people out of a radical consciousness. So the idea that it's never either or, it's always partial victory or partial incorporation or some form of that, misses the point. That the intent is total incorporation. And to the extent it doesn't work, one, I'm not sure how you would measure that, but to the extent we would want to argue it's not working, because I just say it's not working because there's no revolutionary movement occurring. That's where I would start with it. But to the extent that it is or isn't working, should be secondary in terms of a point to investigate, to the fact that it is the intent. So he says here, what we are talking about is the struggle over cultural hegemony, which is these days waged as much in popular culture as anywhere else. So I wrote a note to here that I'm not it's not the struggle over cultural hegemony. It's a political struggle for liberation from colonialism and the role culture plays in that colonization. There is no cultural hegemony without political power. There is only the increasing sophistication of cultural imperialism forced by political struggle. So that to me seems to be where I mostly, this seems to be the crux of where I disagree with Hall, and perhaps Professor Brooks, if her argument is intending to be that what she's doing by investigating the doing a course on Beyonce is some sort of investigation over the struggle over cultural hegemony. I didn't really see that in her argument in the book we were reviewing, or not really reviewing, but talking about. Now I can't remember but put the link in the show description. People can review it. But the like, I didn't see that there. It seemed to be more of her saying what Hall is saying here, that there is victory to be found in Beyonce's Lemonade and Beyonce's popularity and her performance. That there's and I'm saying no, that this is not a struggle over cultural hegemony. There's no cultural hegemony being taken by Beyonce's performance and popularity. There's no, and there can be none without political power, which is really the font of any power to be derived from pop culture. There, you can't have a pop culture. You can't have cultural hegemony. Well, I just say you can't have cultural hegemony without political power. Black people do not have political power. Certainly not commensurate with the fame and popularity and wealth of a Beyonce or a Jay-Z. So it's the point should be, how is Beyonce's popularity, talent, skill, whatever, being manipulated by those who own the industry, who own the stages she appears on, who own the music labels she works for, who own the tours she's paid to go on, and the venue spaces and all of that, and the politics of those owners. They have the cultural hegemony here because they're able to project a Beyonce out to us absent any political power in a way that encourage this, I don't know, a false sense of inclusion, of power itself. Right. And this is where Hall is criticizing people like me. There's a kind of nothing ever changes, the system always wins attitude, which I read as a cynical, protective shell that, I'm sorry to say, American cultural critics frequently wear, a shell that sometimes prevents them from developing cultural strategies that can make a difference. So Elon maybe was joking a little while about my American exceptionalism, but I read this as some sort of condescending Eurocentrism of the diaspora condemning Black America without understanding the specifics of the dynamics here. Is Hall really suggesting that Black people in this country have not understood the cultural environment here in such a way that that has continued to inhibit the development of cultural strategies that can make a difference? That sounds, sort of stereotypically British of you, my dear sir. uh because my point would be, Black people have come up with all kinds of ways to develop cultural strategies to make a difference, but if anything, have been discouraged or have had movements violently interrupted that recognize just what I said. Because I didn't originate this way of thinking, that there is no cultural strategy absent a political one that's going to lead to any liberation. So you're not going to make a movie, you're not going to movie make and songwrite and book write your way to freedom. I acknowledge that the spaces won for difference are few and far between, that they are very carefully policed and regulated. So again, but this needs to be the center, the point of departure, not an add-on midway through an essay, would be my point here. I know that what replaces invisibility is a kind of carefully regulated, segregated visibility. Again, this is right and should be where he starts, but it does not help simply to name call it the same. Well, I don't know to whom. Again, there's no specific reference here. He doesn't give an example of someone of an American cultural critic who is calling it the same. But my version certainly, and I know he's not talking to me and wouldn't have been, and I wasn't, you know, this is a disjointed conversation I'm having with the late Stuart Hall, but he's but I'm not saying it's exactly the same. I'm in fact continuing to say the same intent is becoming more sophisticated and in its masking and more difficult to realize because of all, not this Tyler Perry trash, but the increasing production of by black filmmakers of black content with talented black people in it. Uh, but the goal is the same. The end result is the same. That is, we're not getting a media environment that is inspiring radical political thought. We're getting a media environment that suppresses that thought. So then, that name calling merely reflects the particular model of cultural politics to which we remain attached, precisely the zero sum game, our model replacing their model, our identities in place of their identities. What Antonio Gramsci called culture as a once and for all war of maneuver, when in fact the only game in town worth playing is the game of cultural wars of position. So again, I agree with Gramsci here, not Hall. It is more of a zero sum game and a war of maneuver. It's not. These cultural wars of position are not that. They are the positioning that occurs is positioning black consciousness and thought away from radicalism. Again, uh, well, for if the global postmodern represents an ambiguous opening to difference and to the margins and makes a certain kind of decentering of the Western narrative a likely possibility, it is matched from the very heartland of cultural politics by the backlash, the aggressive resistance to difference, the attempt to restore the canon of Western civilization, the assault, direct and indirect, on multiculturalism, the return to grand narratives of history, language, and literature, the defense of ethnic absolutism, of a cultural racism that has marked the Thatcher and the Reagan eras. He died during my wedding. And the new xenophobias that are about to overwhelm Fortress Europe. Part of the problem is that we have forgotten what sort of space the space of popular culture is. And Black popular culture is not exempt from the dialectic, which is historical, not a matter of bad faith. It is therefore necessary to deconstruct the popular once and for all. I agree with that part. I just don't feel like this essay does that. Because he's not looking at that particular dialectic as it has occurred in this country. And the context I described earlier, where popular culture in this country emerged specifically with the inclusion in the context of the enslavement, with the inclusion of the enslavement and the need to justify the enslavement of African people. So I agree, Black popular culture is not exempt from from that dialectic. And in that context, and in the context of the militarized emergence of mass communications research, propaganda, psychological warfare, the specifics of symbolic Black capitalism imposed by Nixon, in that, that all of that history is I think ignored in this essay, and it forms the dialectic against which we have to that, not against which, but that we have to recognize and engage in its struggle. That is, Black people make an advance politically, and it is suppressed and managed and rebranded through a false symbolic inclusion representation of that experience through pop culture. A pop culture that to this day is still as owned and consolidated and managed by a white ruling elite as has ever been the case. So, mm, um, There's obviously a lot more of that. So I definitely hope we have that conversation and maybe some more around what I am and am not getting from this. But um, blacks in the British diaspora must, at this historical moment, refuse the binary black or British. This was the other part. Okay, so this was the other part where I know I disagree, and I wanted to get to where does he? Let me see. Let me just for the sake of time here. Where does he get to the floating signifier? That's on page 112. And yeah, so that's just okay, is that before? All right, I don't want to yeah, okay, that's right here. Okay. Good, good, good. So this is where he starts to talk more about that essentializing. I remember Paul Gilroy's work got I'm not even going to say the names because I don't want to do them dirty, and some of them are not here anymore. But Paul Gilroy's work in the Black Atlantic and all of that got a lot of hate in the Africana spaces I was in grad school. Um, um, and it's because of this point here where that I alluded to earlier that this essentialism that African centered folks are often accused of engaging in, when people like Gilroy and Hall are saying black people must refuse the or in black or British because the or remains the site of constant contestation when the aim of the struggle must be instead to replace the or with the potentiality or the possibility of an and, that is to become black and British as opposed to black or British, as Gilroy and Hall are saying is the false binary. But in my note I wrote, but what does it mean to be and as opposed to in? So again, what Hall ignores is this and Gilroy and others have ignored is the nuance and sophistication within at least some African centered thought, and certainly my own, to the extent that I'm saying I don't want it to be a discussion of black or British or black and British, but in this case, black in England or African in America, not African American, not African and American, but Africans in America. So it's again, and if you engage that, it's not an over essentialization of African American, European, etc. It's a struggle with a constant contestation with the actual experience of being colonized, and then what does that mean racially within that new location of the colonization, that is in England, in the United States. So I think that difference, and as he says here, then he says the essentializing moment is weak because it naturalizes and dehistoricizes difference. And I'm saying no, the whole what I'm arguing, at least, and what those he leaves unnamed, because again, he doesn't name anybody. He's not saying, look at this person's argument and let me show you why it's wrong. He's just saying, this is why I like Cornel West, why I like Paul Gilroy. The only person he mentions in terms of disagreement is Gramsci, oddly. But there's no contemporary black thinker that he makes reference to in this essay where he can show the failure of their logic. So what that also does, and I actually I remember I wrote, there are a few papers that I wrote that in my grad school career that I actually really thought were good. Not many. And one of them was this, that I'd written one on Afrocentricity. And I went and I showed how in many criticisms of Afrocentricity, similar to this one, I should have used this essay, is that they don't specify who they're talking about. They essentialize all of the African-centered world. So my point would be those who have been arguing for African in America or black in England do exactly what he says that they're not doing. It completely historicizes the differences and explains why an African colonized by England from Jamaica in England, for instance, is going to have a similar but distinct experience from an African enslaved and colonized here in the United States. But it's not an argument about becoming and American and British. So then he goes into this whole thing, and I didn't want to get into a whole sort of Kamal style, personal thing, but it does start to feel like a personal defense in this essay when Hall starts talking about, how people define where he writes it in a very slick way, but it's saying what he's ultimately saying is you can't. He's doing what Henry Louis Gates does a version of today. I don't want people telling me how to be black. And police the boundaries of that political discourse. You can't police my blackness. You can't tell me how to be black. And he says, for which I'm sorry to read Jungle Fever as if we can translate from nature to politics using a racial category to warrant the politics of culture. Like, I get it. I get it. You wanna say black is a signifier. Black can be any number of different things. I get all of that. And I get how black has been a construct of European design that's meant to be very anti-black and very anti-African. I'm with you on all that. But then to say that any criticism of Jungle Fever is somehow an African-centered or Afrocentric essentialist retrograde. No, no, no. It can be that, but it can also be an appropriate criticism of the manifestations of colonization in a contemporary setting. And we can't just simply say that because uh, uh, I'm dating this one or marrying that one, or and saying that and you see me with a white partner or this that you're just calling me out of my name because because you're an essentialist. It may be, but it may also be that they're raising a criticism. You know what? Let me see something here. I was just asked about this, and I'm not going to divulge. Obviously, I don't want to put because I was just, how did I answer this? So it was in response. So Nikki Giovanni just passed away recently, and there was some criticism of her having a white partner. And of course, someone asked me, what do I think about that, given my own background? And my exact text to them was, I don't know. Sure, it can be easily said that one spouse says nothing of a commitment to a people or cause, but I also find it hard to divorce any of it from the context. Fanon, Diop, CLR James, my own father, all were committed to black liberation, and yet that they would end up with white wives at various points. My father ended up with a black woman, was with black women before my mother and after my mother. Does say something to me about their political or cultural orientation or even a subtle bias. I don't know. None of it is as important to me as their politics, end quote. So I'm saying not every criticism or investigation of interracial relationships should be dismissed as, oh, they're just calling me a jungle fever, right? And because they're essentialists. There's I think legit investigation of it, even as we may ultimately conclude that who you end up with is who you end up with. And as I said in that text, I'm more interested in the politics. You know, again, give me a Fanon and his white wife as opposed to who would be a good, I don't know, John Hope Bryant and his black wife. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's an all black couple, and far less helpful to black liberation than the interracial relationship Fanon may have been in. So anyway, but all right, okay. So I didn't, uh by the way, I missed one of my notes here. I said, I'm not interested in space as one for difference. I'm interested in how space can be one for different politics to be communicated or most likely distorted, and how those differences do or do not manifest materially, politically, and in context. So yeah, so as he says here, kind of, that there is space. well, this may not be the part I was referring to. Dominant ethnicities are always underpinned by a particular sexual economy, a particular figured masculinity, a particular class identity. There's no guarantee in reaching for an essentialized racial identity for which we think we can entertain that it will always turn out to be mutually liberating and progressive on all other dimensions. It can be one. There is a politics there to be struggled for, but the invocation of a guaranteed Black experience behind it will not produce that politics. So let me go back to where, okay, because I skipped this part and I wanted to, because this is where he was, actually wanted to play something that will help support an understanding of what I just read and also where we disagree. Um, Moreover, we tend to privilege experience itself as if Black life is lived experience outside of representation. We have only, as it were, to express what we already know we are. Instead, it is only through the way in which we represent and imagine ourselves that we come to know how we are constituted and who we are. There is no escape from the politics of representation, and we cannot wield how life really is out there as a kind of test against which the political rightness of wrongness or wrongness of a particular cultural strategy or text can be measured. It will not be a mystery to you that I think that Black is none of these things. In reality, it is not a category of essence and hence this way of understanding the floating signifier in Black popular culture now will not do. So this is, again, this is a very, to me, slick and an intelligent way to say the wrong thing. African-centered thinkers, race-first thinkers of a variety of stripes are not saying that Black can only be one thing, that there's only one way to live Blackness or be Black and all of that. And this is, to me, reads again as a personal defensiveness around a politic as opposed to an actual investigation of the situation. Because the issue isn't, and I made a note here that he's sort of he's doing the anti Lorraine Hansberry thing. Hall says we should focus on diversity of the Black experience, but this runs up against Lorraine Hansberry because remember, Lorraine Hansberry said in that beautiful response to a question about Black success that she's a representative of, she said, for you to focus on the abstract as opposed for you to focus on the specific as opposed to the abstract is for you to, in this case, be in error. And that's what Hall is doing here. Yes, that's Blackness is all kinds of different things, but there is an overwhelming central core similarity to the quote unquote Black experience in any given setting that does need to be recognized if anyone is to be liberated. Even if the goal is to have some deracialized humanity, then you have to recognize that a group of humans are being targeted for oppression, and it has a lot to do with their phenotype. So he wants us to have this. It feels like he wants us to have this thing of again, don't tell me how to be Black, bro. And if I speak a certain way, date a certain kind, or do a certain thing, I'm just as Black. You can't define me. And others are saying, no, nobody's trying to deny you your Blackness. We just don't want you to ignore the majority experience happening and how what happens to you or other forms of Blackness is either not indicative of a majority experience or is worse, being used to justify the negative experience of the majority. All right. So I thought here we could just take a quick pause. And for those who are not familiar with, and those who may need the reminder, to take a quick look at Hall explaining what he means by the floating signifier. And then we'll come back and wrap.
Dago wop, guinea, garlic bread, pizza slinging, spaghetti bending, victim on Perry Como.
Hold up. This is one of my favorite scenes in all of film history. And I love that this starts. So just quickly, I used to really appreciate Spike Lee, if for no other reason, seeming to make an attempt to raise some critical questions using his medium. And I do feel like he started out that way. As wrong as he may have been, as flawed as he may have been, seemed like there was an attempt at least. Okay. This scene to me is one of the funniest scenes in film history from Do the Right Thing. I still laugh at it when I see it to this day. I love this scene. And I love that. Shout out to Sut Jali and the Media Education Foundation for including that in this clip here. But all right. Let's start it again.
Dago Wab, Guinea, garlic bread, pizza slinging, spaghetti bending, Victimone, Perry Como, Luciano Pavarotti, solo meal non-singer motherfucker.
You gold teeth, gold chain wearing, fried chicken and biscuit eating monkey.
Slanty-eyed, Mino speaky American, own every fruit and vegetable stand in New York. Bullshit Reverend Sun Young Moon. Menudo, meet a Puerto Rican cocksucker. But he's Jew, asshole.
Hold up! Time out! Time out! Y'all take a chill!
As the previous clip from Spike Lee's film Do the Right Thing shows, racial slurs and insults trip easily from people's lips. More and more, it seems, the dividing lines within our society are being drawn along how we are physically different from one another. Stuart Hall is Professor of Sociology at the Open University in Britain and is a key figure in the development of what has come to be known as cultural studies.
What do I mean by a floating signifier? Well, to put it crudely, race is one of those major concepts which organize the great classificatory systems of difference which operate in human societies. And to say that race is a discursive category recognizes that all attempts to ground this concept scientifically, to locate differences between the races on what one might call scientific, biological, or genetic grounds, have been largely shown to be untenable. We must therefore, it said, substitute a socio-historical or cultural definition of race for the biological one. As the philosopher Anthony Appiah once put it succinctly, that it's time, as it were, that the biological concept of race was sunk without trace. Race is more like a language than it is like the way in which we are biologically constituted. Signifiers refer...
By the way, sorry to interrupt again, but Appiah was a big-time anti-Afrocentric interlocutor back in the day. So it's weird to be reminded of all these beefs and where I was at one point and where folks, to see it playing out here a little bit. But it makes sense that he would be referencing Cornel West, Anthony Appiah, criticizing Gramsci, and by the way, doesn't mention in that essay at all Fanon, which I thought would have been perfect. But again, that's sort of showing where Hall is situated.
Refer to the systems and concepts of the classification of a culture, to its making meaning practices. And those things gain their meaning not because of what they contain in their essence, but in the shifting relations of difference which they establish with other concepts and ideas in a signifying field. Their meaning, because it is relational and not essential, can never be finally fixed, but is subject to the constant process of redefinition and appropriation. But you may say, can you seriously be claiming that it is simply a signifier, an empty sign, that it is not fixed in its inner nature, that it cannot be secured in its meaning, that it floats in a sea of relational differences? Is that the argument that you're advancing? And isn't it not only wrong, but a trivial, and I hear the word being rustled in the audience, an idealist approach to the brute facts of human history, which after all have disfigured the lives and crippled and constrained the potentialities of literally millions of the world's dispossessed? After all, why don't we use the evidence of our eyes? If race was such a complicated thing, why would it be so manifestly obvious to everywhere we look? I better say it again because I can feel the sense of relief that after skirting around through these various discursive structures, we've come to what, after all, we all know about race. It's reality. You can see its effects. You can see it in the faces of the people around you. You can see people pulling their skirts aside as people from another racial group come into the room. You can see the operation of racial discrimination in institutions and so on. What is the need of all this scholarly hullabaloo about race when you can just turn to its reality? What trail through history is more literally marked by blood and violence, by the genocide of the Middle Passage, the horrors of plantation servitude, and the hanging tree? A signifier, a discourse. Yes, that is my argument.
All right, so at least just a little look at how Hall approaches the point here. And let me bring the essay back up. But it is to the diversity, not the homogeneity of Black experience that we must now give our undivided creative attention. This is not simply to appreciate the historical and experiential differences between communities, regions, country, and city, across national cultures, between diasporas, but also to recognize the other kinds of difference that place, position, and locate Black people. The point is not simply that since our racial differences do not constitute all of us, we are always different, negotiating different kinds of differences of gender, of sexuality, of class. It is also that these antagonisms refuse to be neatly aligned. They are simply not reducible to one another. They refuse to coalesce around a single axis of differentiation. Dominant ethnicities are always underpinned by a particular sexual economy, the range of different Black subjectives. I want to end with two thoughts that take the point back to the subject of popular culture. The first is to remind you that popular culture, commodified and stereotyped as it often is not at all as we sometimes think of it, the arena where we find who we really are, the truth of our experience. Now, I agree with that. It is an arena that is profoundly mythic. It is a theater of popular desires, a theater of popular fantasies. It is where we discover and play with the identifications of ourselves and where we are imagined. But you know what he says? He does not say it is. He does not say it is a space of politicized psychological warfare meant to suppress the radical political consciousness of a continuing internally colonized community. Or it's not meant as a space to support the ongoing imperialism of a politically powerful dominant society and to protect that power. And that's the part I think that gets left out of maybe a lot of cultural studies. And why I've struggled with some of that work. But the carnivalesque is not simply an upturning of two things that remain locked within our oppositional frameworks. It is also cross-cut by what Bakhtin calls the dialogic. I simply wish to end with an account of what is involved in understanding popular culture in a dialogic rather than in a strictly oppositional way. From the politics and poetics of transgression by Stahlebras and White, a recurrent pattern emerges. The top attempts to reject and eliminate the bottom for reasons of prestige and status, only to discover not only that it is in some way frequently dependent upon the low other, but also that the top includes that low symbolically as a primary eroticized constituent of its own fantasy life. The result is a mobile, conflictual fusion of power, fear, and desire in the construction of subjectivity, a psychological dependence upon precisely those others which are being rigorously opposed and excluded at the social level. It is for this reason that what is socially peripheral is so frequently symbolically central. Now, as I understand this point here, and as I wrote in my note, Fanon is better than Stahlebras is because the proper political context is not included in that dialogic summary, the summary of that dialogic. And that's what I think is missing in Hall's essay here. That yes, the diversity of blackness is real. Race is a floating signifier. I can be with all of that, but the colonized, as Fanon said, need to not destroy the culture of the colonizer, similar to what Stali Bras is saying there, but to ossify it in a colonized form so that it testifies against its progenitors. And that's the point that I think gets ignored in all of this, that there is an intent to manage the colony and present a version of blackness that appeases and gives justification to white colonial rule. So yes, there's a push and pull, there's a struggle, there's a form of inclusiveness and diversity, there's a form of preferred blackness to be put on display, but all to be understood in that particular context, not as a space where victories can be won. And that's where I definitely disagree with Hall on that. And I am in that group that he was critical of. So all right. Where was I going to go next? So, sort of to that point, one more piece on this issue. I did, again, go to our good folks at JSTOR, who I would never want to upset in any way whatsoever. But from their daily blog, When Black Celebrities Wore Blackface, and I just wanted to highlight a couple things from this that I think were important here. It's an interesting article in the sense written by Dorothy Berry in 2020 that it talks about the summary of it is essentially, and I'll put the link so you can all read it and get more of it than I'll give here, but it tells the story of Black minstrel, blackface wearing performers ushering in a new late 19th century form of blackness and Black manhood in particular that was more aggressive, that both inspired and set in pattern, in motion, this desire of white audiences to see that Black tough guy, but then also to project that reality onto Black life in real life, and to treat Black people in that way as a result. So when Black men defend themselves and kill a Black man kills a white man who is accosting a Black woman, and kills this Robert Thorpe character, the killing is associated with this rise of a new Black manhood and performance that has constantly both inspired a desire and a fear among whites. So it's interesting that they start with that. The 1900 New York race riot that they're talking about began with the police violence against a Black woman. A white undercover cop allegedly thought that this Black woman on the corner was a prostitute, sex worker, and wanted to treat her as such, as if that was deserving of violence. And then a Black man sees him, kills him, and it starts this so-called riot. But spiraled out to suppress the riots. It started out to what began with this riot, beginning itself with police violence against a Black woman, spiraled out to suppress a burgeoning community of Black creatives who were showing themselves to be outside of the strictures prescribed by a white society expecting deference. So why I thought this was interesting and to bring it up now is that this is sort of getting more to my point, actually, that popular culture is not a battleground to be contested. It is a battleground to be won by those with political power and to be used for that political power. So when black people start performing in ways that white audiences and white elites don't want, there is in this case a literal violent backlash and a need to reinscribe that need to project a version of blackness that doesn't result in this kind of white fear and maybe inspire this similar kind of black behavior. So the article talks about a white backlash that rose up to try to subdue this challenge of black creatives to a status quo. And then there's a debate to what extent that they were able to do that, to what extent how they defined it. But as it says here, in the 1890s, a new type of character began to filling the song sheets and stages, that of the urban, dangerous, dapper black man who wore the sharpest suits and carried even sharper switchblades. The craze also marked a moment when white social consciousness grasped onto an idea of dangerous and alluring urban blackness that has been encoded in popular American culture ever since. The conflict between performers trying to simultaneously to accurately reflect street life while knowingly making money off of white audiences hungry for stories of black danger in some ways foreshadowed ongoing dichotomies marking black popular culture, music styles that make it to the mainstream of commercial culture from blues to hip hop. So this point is, I think, important, and one that I think speaks to what Hall was accurately trying to point out in his piece, that there is a politics to all of this in identifying, but he says it, he doesn't say it for the purposes that or in the way that this article does, and for what I think the purposes may be in this article, and certainly would be mine, that the politicizing of the space is to, again, ultimately justify the continuing oppression of black people and others. So if there is some sort of struggle, the response isn't a victory for black people. The inclusiveness in the response isn't a victory. It's a rebranding and an attempt to suppress this threatening element. So the argument shouldn't be, as I take it from Hall, to go against black people wanting to identify a black experience that needs to be collectivized and defended or struggled against. The argument from Hall should be more directed at the attempt of those with political power, that is white colonizers, to rebrand and redefine with ever increasing sophistication the forms of black protest, struggle, and ultimate desires. But too much of that whole essay is in wanting to defend the diversity of blackness, and that's not really the point. Or it misses the point to do that, I think. Formal minstrel performers who sought to reclaim and authenticate the performance of subaltern blackness from white performers like Williams and Walker did their two real coons act, were certainly not aristocratic, and while popular, were on the margins of black respectability, as black performers often performing with the same burnt cork painted faces as stereotyping whites. Historian James Dorman writes that they were blacks playing whites playing blacks, but that the performers' racial identity convinced audiences and critics that they represented the reality of blackness and that the reality was the coon. I really do like that point. And I think that's often what we see today in popular culture, black people playing whites playing black people. They're performing a version of blackness that was developed and preferred by whites for white audiences. And then it's meant to be projected back to black people. And this is Fanon's point, as I understand it, in a way that testifies against the black population by saying that this is really who they are and why they deserve to be treated as such. So this is where I got the thumbnail. This is just some of the examples of these black attempts to subvert as this article claims, at least. I always struggle to what extent that's happening. But the audience conflation of performance with performers, however, came to a head in August of 1900 when the riot on the street fixed its focus on Black celebrities whose transgressive performance was perceived as representing their true dangerous selves. And journalists spent more time commenting on the victims' fashion choices than on their injuries, even when acknowledging that the mob was out of control and the police had done more to assist the violence than to stop it. And then, as the New York Sun wrote, the mob had gone after one of those sassy, chesty coons. So it's no different than when Obama said, the people rioting in Baltimore are thugs, because that's what is projected on TV. That's what's projected in filmed performance. That's what's projected in pop culture of what Black people should be and are, even as they are performing a version of themselves often preferred by whites. In spite of the violence they endured, Hogan, Williams, Walker, and Cole, these are the Black performers that Burt Williams and others who black-faced and ushered in this new masculinity and manhood. They continued to gain success and imbued their work with political commentary and social criticism that spoke to Black audiences on levels that slipped the notice of white listeners. Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was also attacked, contributed to Williams and Walker musicals, commenting on colorism, colonialist capitalism, class politics. I'd be interested to see more of those, the text of those plays or musicals, and see to what extent that occurred. I'm fascinated by that. Their 1902 smash in Dahomey became so popular that the royal family of England requested a private performance. So that's why I'm like, well, what was their comment on all of this if the royal family of England wants to see it? While male performers were flashpoints on the riot, there were integral female dancers, writers, and performers like Ada Overton Walker and Abby Mitchell Cook, who were active partners in the creative process in Black Bohemia and stars in musicals like In Dahomey and Bandana Land. The transition away from simplistic coon songs and toward more socially subversive material was not necessarily in reaction to the violence of the riot. It could be tied to the creative freedom that can come with commercial success as part of the influx of new collaborators like the Johnson Brothers, or just through aging and political maturation. Nevertheless, the artists' continued use of superficial language pulled from minstrel archetypes has been exploration and examination of African-American musical theater in 1990s and 1910s, difficult as the layers of self-effacing puns and racial jokes that often provided protection for liberatory Black messaging remain off-putting. The lives they lived and the art they created represented a new but long-lasting paradox for Black performers who wanted to capture some of the rough and rowdy realities of urban life, but then had to deal with the response of white audiences who took the messaging to heart and used it as a lens to see all Black people, not as human beings, but as performance stereotypes, setting in motion a pattern we see to this day. Wait, do you all not hear me? Oh, I'm the stream is working, so it shouldn't be. Okay, that was weird. Okay, got you. All right, so let's see. Let me just check my notes here. Hall says we should focus on diversity of the Black. Okay, I did that. He does not consider the function of popular and culture in a colony. There is no context of the history of U.S. mass comm propaganda, cyber, the rise of the internet as military technology, or of counterinsurgency. Right. That was. So okay. So that would be that anyway. So I just wanted to look at those things and put some of that together. And I hope that Professor Brooks takes me up on a chance to discuss this with her because I'm very interested in seeing how she sees maybe my misreading of Hall and of her work and of what, maybe there, how she interprets what she's doing with the Beyonce class and how what seemed to be her positive discussion of Beyonce comports with what Hall was saying there, or but all right, before I get out of here, are there any questions, comments, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, consternation, contemplation, condemnation, consternation? Anything I've missed? Because I have not been focused on the chat. So if there's something that you want to recycle to the top and let me know. A lot of people love Beyonce. How would you not? The floating signifier work is critical. My bad, Zanzibar. Are there any that I missed? Are there any questions that I missed that anyone would want to recycle back up here? Thank you, Esme. Ball. How can you talk about this tradition without connecting it to Old World Blackamoor tradition? There's a lot of traditions I'm not connecting it to. How can you raise this question in such a disrespectful way without putting in the context of the work that I'm doing or how I came to this topic today? Have you checked out Erica Edwards' work, The Other Side of Terror? No, I have not. What is, if you got a link, drop it, or maybe say another word or two, or I'll just look for it. Yeah. Apologies, but are you familiar with the concept of political blackness? Because the basis of Hall's analysis. It's been a while since I've addressed this. So as I said, I haven't read Hall's work in a minute, and I only went back to read this essay on request of Dr. Brooks. So beyond a vague memory, but I feel like I addressed it in my response. I addressed his what I think is a flawed approach and his underpoliticizing of blackness. So, but again, send me a link, or I can drop a link and you could join me up here and break it down. For instance, what am I missing? What have I said here this morning that would be amended or adjusted by a better understanding? Or what did I get wrong in assessing his essay by not focusing on the definition and history of political, or his approach to political blackness? Is it different from Biko's? Because as I said in September during Biko's birthday, I am Biko black. I don't know, but let me know let me know how you think I got it wrong. I know, not Ball. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Kind of crazy ass approach is that? But I know the chat is undefeated, but speak up, like be more clear. Like, what is it that I've gotten wrong? Send me an email, drop a link. I don't know. Let me know if you want to join me up here. I don't know. Also, how that fits in with the British context. I think I addressed that. Again, I'm addressing his essay, that one essay this morning. I'm not addressing all of Hall's work. But I feel like I addressed the specifics of that context. I don't know. Did you all see the whole thing? I don't know. I don't know, Mr. The Fall. Or whoever else out here got something on that. Like, what is it? I'm starting to feel a kind of way. I'm starting to feel a kind of way. Jab, people smarter than me ask why you don't situate Hall's statement in the context of political blackness in the UK in the 70s and 80s. I don't know what that means, but again, I'm I'm responding to this one essay. I mentioned him coming out of British cultural studies. I mentioned some of the the political differences. I'm not really sure. So the fact that, and I feel like I addressed his politicizing of blackness in that essay. So if anybody is here that would want to clarify what it is I got wrong, let me know. And there's always people smarter than me in the chat, and you too, Robin C. Apparently. Erica Edwards has been recommended to you many times. I mean, my bad. But I haven't read it. I'm sorry. My bad. You didn't discuss political blackness, no. But okay, but I discussed his politicization of blackness. So what is it that is being said by his send me the okay, I'll look up the essay. Is there one essay he wrote or a chapter that I'm not remembering or something specifically or I'm not really, and what is it that I've gotten wrong because I didn't address that specifically? Like what the chat is hilarious. Okay, you want to join me? Sure. Invite guests. There goes the link in the chat. Wait, I can't. Yeah, there goes the link in the chat. Come on up. I'm not about to lash out. I feel like I'm being lashed out against. So I said I'm feeling a kind of way. So folks, because I'm not seeing anybody address what they said I've gotten wrong. They're just addressing what I've left out, even though he didn't bring up political blackness in this essay, and I'm responding to one essay. But the link's in the chat. You can come on up here. All right, there you are. Welcome.
Afternoon. No, what I mean, no will or no rudeness, but and I understand exactly what you are saying in terms of Hall's critique. But what I mean by the context of Britain is like, right, so Britain in the late 40s, as far as 1948 was when the HMS Empire Windrush arrived in British shores, bringing what for a long time was considered the first grouping of migrants from the Caribbean over to England. Now, as time's gone on, that's been recontextualized, and the realization is there actually was a Black population in this country, but the numbers were smaller. So this was the first time that they were here in a large propensity that Britain was not used to. So the thing is, as far as that context, those people were deemed not welcome and not part of the Commonwealth, despite the efforts of colonialism in terms of like the education and the literature that was sent forth that said they were as much Englishmen as the working Englishman who was born and bred in Britain. And when they arrived, because they weren't given no protection or any information, it was just you work hard to prove that you're just as much here. It was a shock to realize that said mother country wasn't what they were expecting it to be, which includes them being told to go home, them being beaten up, the murder of Kelso Cochrane, and those under the sun. Now, the reason I say I bring it up in the context of the 70s and the 80s is around in the 70s, that's when you see a influx of people from South Asia, and some of those who were stationed, who were descendants of the buffer class in places like, Tanganyika and Zanzibar and places of that ilk. And they, despite in some ways slightly receiving better treatment compared to those from the Caribbean and those from Africa, were regarded in much the same way. And those who also, even then, they own businesses were getting smashed up and beaten upon. So political blackness was a unifying broad umbrella as far as something that people could rally behind and fight with in that moment in the face of that dominant white oppression, especially considering it's a British oppression which tends to prefer to focus on class rather than race as the pervading issue. Is that making sense? Am I explaining myself
I
very
think
clear?
it's making sense, but I'm still not clear on what then are you then saying this is what Hall means by political blackness, and then how does this what does this
Yes,
have to
that's
how
what
does
it
this
means.
okay,
That's what it means when he's saying,
so
in
what did I
terms of incorporating black and Britishness, because
right,
in Britain, the one drop rule is not a thing. It is a
right,
thing in America, which I understand why it is baffling for you in hearing him say to meld, Britishness and blackness, and like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because for a long time, the conversation was up until a certain point of, could you be black and British, which meant you was something other of, and that you didn't belong here.
right. So
There's
so
also
again,
I think there's also a factor is as well the conversation in race in this country, in our two different nations, is in America, race is centered as the thing that matters and is at the core of it, whereas the people in power over here would say we are beyond that. We need to infer new discussions regarding race, which conveniently they don't do.
right, but
Mhm.
again, so I appreciate what you're saying there, but I don't see how anything I've said today ignores or somehow does not address any of that history. In fact, what I was saying was, especially in the context of
Mhm.
the 1990s Afrocentric, African-centered world debate with Paul Gilroy and Stuart Hall that I was
Mhm.
familiar with, they
Yes.
don't agree. So it's
Mhm.
not that I don't understand that history or don't agree or understand Hall's approach. This is why I was confused by why all this discussion of political blackness in the chat was suggesting that I had ignored something.
Well,
I didn't ignore what I was saying was I
give
disagree, and I was acknowledging that there's that I also come out intellectually, particularly back in grad school, of a wing of thought that does not agree with that even understands and was even in comradeship with Africans in England
Mhm.
who were rejecting not because of the differences of the one drop rule or of an ignorance of how race has evolved in the context of Europe, but to
Mhm.
say as a Pan-African struggle, the goal, even among Africans in England, was not to become British, but to be recognized as Africans in England.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's all. And to this day, there's still movements of the like. So all I was saying was I understand that that's what Hall's point was, and
Mhm.
I'm saying that I don't agree with it and don't agree and was all and am also impacted by a wing of thought that doesn't agree with that. So
Okay.
again, I'm not. But if there's something you or anyone else would want to point out to,
Yeah.
so in other words, what did I say today, or what in my presentation of this discussion today did not address that
Well,
factor, that history, or how does what you're now bringing to the discussion
well,
change
the the
anything that
reason
was
I
said?
bring this up, and I also want to say, brother Jamil, I apologize. I don't mean to call him bull in any sort of disrespect, in any kind of disrespectful way, or to be rude. I'm not trying to denigrate him as far as being a doctor. That is absolute. I no way I'm doing that.
All
It's
right.
just that now that you say this to me, I understand that information, that is registered in there and part of this critique, and I think that is great. It's just that in the discussion in the moment, as you was framing it, it came across as though, as you said, when you said he was speaking from a very British lens, which in quite certain experiences that I've had, even with people consider themselves radically minded, and this is a two-way conversation, because the UK is just as guilty in terms of the images it sends out into the world as though it is a white only nation, but British as though it is a signifier for white, when really I think the term is more so English, because English, especially in the context over here, denotes certain national and also racial ideas of who is here in the country.
Fair enough.
So
And
I
Elon says in the
mean
moment I was flattening Hall.
no,
No. But see,
no in a
both of you, I think, are wrong on this. I wasn't flattening Hall. I was saying that he was flattening the experience over here. Because the point you're
Okay.
talking about, that Elon, I may also be talking about, is that Hall was saying that he was speaking again vaguely, without reference, and generally to Black American cultural critics who don't seem to understand the context in which they are working, and therefore cannot develop competent strategies to respond to all of this. So I was saying that was the moment where I was saying where he was sounding very, and I did use the word British. So I maybe need to be more specific in saying English in that case. But in that sense, what I was saying was he was flattening the experience here and misreading the experience here. And because he didn't cite anything, he's just being vague. I did read it as being as condescending. He's condescending and coming across as is often the stereotype of the English is speaking to Americans, black, white, or other, that these unsophisticated Americans don't get it.
Yes, I do understand that. Also,
that's all I meant by that. That's all I meant by that.
They say no diaspora wars thing. I'm not in. No, it's just because somebody who's there in the chat was saying it. I personally think sometimes, as far as arguing who has it worse, it ends up being like a race to the bottom, and it doesn't really get anywhere. But it's the problem. I think sometimes with conversations like these, they can end up being very anecdotal, and sometimes people who speak these anecdotes, they try and theirs is more like is worthy of more consideration than others, but it doesn't paint a broader picture, because there's just this suggestion as well. There's a book by a gentleman by the name of Darren Wallace that I've been reading called The Culture Trap, which his argument, as far as is specifically in the context of both Britain and America, is that culture is often used as an explanator as to why people from Jamaica are considered overachievers in America and underachievers in Britain, especially the thing over here is like, whereas in America, for African Americans, they say how they underachieve compared to, say, the African students and the Jamaican students, and how they're even doing better than the white kids, whereas over here, before they would do it as far as people who are Asian, but now it seems that the conversation is more geared to saying, look at how well the Africans are doing compared to the Caribbeans, which ignores the context of when some of those people, like my own father, who's Ghanaian, who fled to Britain in the 80s under, because of J.J. Rawlings, and my mother, who's Jamaican, who came here in 1975. And when they arrived, but also like just the factor of where those arguments, it has their origins in racial uplift that's been twisted by conservatives for much more nefarious means. And also, just as I said, considering my own background, it makes me think sometimes, that's funny, so where the hell do I fit in this supposed context then?
Look, I hear you and I appreciate it. And I thank you for jumping up here. I do have someone else who wants to join, so I want to give them
And
a chance. But
I'm
yeah,
glad to talk with you, sir. I'm glad. I'm really glad to be able
likewise,
to.
I love it.
But it's
But
something I
remember,
think
the
is
only person
worth.
doing the vague essentializing in this morning was Hall.
Sure, but it's something I do think is worth talking about, considering you know, I know some of my American comrades and allies, they look into the history regarding Britain and, black radical thinking and thought and political action, and they see images of those groups, and they see that there are people who are, say, Indian or Southeast Asian there, and wondering, what the hell are they doing there, claiming that they've got this identity of blackness, and that needs a broader clarification. It's
Yes.
not as like the reason how we have a black woman of Nigerian descent and of Yoruba, Yoruba ethnicity, and previously the first Indian Hindu prime minister, who was the richest man to ever become prime minister. It stems from that, but it's used for, those reasons that said conservatives in this country do, to both negate the accusations of racism, and also rather cynically use those people as an experiment when they're out of favor with the British public and the populace. So then later back in, they can probably bring in the kind of people who they would prefer to be conservative leaders.
Right on. I appreciate that. And I disagree, Elon. I'm absolutely in conversation with Hall. I'm reading his work and engaging it. I don't agree. I mean, you may not agree, so I don't agree. But I appreciate it. The Fall 3, thank you very much. And
You're
I look
welcome.
forward to
You're
having more
welcome, sir.
conversation with you. Thank you for jumping up here. Appreciate it. Sith Lord, welcome. What's on your mind? What's up?
Hey, what's up? Can you hear me? Am I
I
clear?
can, loud and
All
clear.
right. Hey, I just want to say thanks for showing that video. So I belong to like I'm not a Christian or anything, but I belong to like a very left wing radical black church here in Cincinnati. So they actually showed that video, which had kind of prompted me to begin thinking about like youth work in black high schools in particular, like here in my city. And just really trying to like wrap around this whole idea of like, is it even possible to, think about an anti-racist pedagogy that's deeply informed by black radical traditions, and things like that. Not like an anti-racist pedagogy.
Sith, I didn't do that. I don't know what happened there. Feel free to jump back up. I'll put the link back in the chat. I don't know what happened there. The layout is cool because we can see the live chat on the screen, but the iMWiL logo on the top right makes it hard to see most recent comment. Consider moving it or making it transparent. All right. I don't know what to tell you. All right, I'll work on that. I don't know. Actually, you can't. Oh, wait, you can. Look. Well, then it just switches the logos. I don't know, man. I could just take it away. How about that? We'll just take it away. Sith
Hey,
Lord,
I'm back.
you back. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not too sure what happened, but I'll just make it quick. I just really liked the framing that you said about like being African in America versus the and or. And so I was just wondering,
I'm not doing this. I promise you, this is not me. I don't know what keeps happening. But if you had just one question, maybe type it in the chat. Tripping on Utopia. Nothing to do with this topic. Read Tripping on Utopia. will continue to say this until you have a show on it. Well, maybe email me a link or something. Whoops. But yeah, you can't put both in the left corner. You don't have that option. So, Musa, welcome. Musa?
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello? Yep.
Okay. I was listening to your program and also turning this thing on, so I was hearing the echo. Sorry about that.
It's all good. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was listening to your breakdown of Stuart Hall's work, and it resonated with me because first of all, I'm from Malawi, so very, very sort of like the former British Central Africa region.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to say that the thing that I find most missing in Stuart Hall's analysis is that his analysis when he talks about dialectical stuff, dialectical materialism, or when he implies it, it is all very good and strong. But he seems to slip into this cosmopolitanism and this notion of sort of like blackness forming itself out of the materials of the colonial cosmopole, and therefore slipping further into why we can be both, as opposed to being African in the domination that is happening. This seems to be like a consistent mistake that occurs in his work, and therefore I am more inclined with your position to say there's never really. I think it's like it's a false notion to say that we have always been exclusionary. African thought has never seen itself as in opposition to anyone. And this is what we need to rescue from the pre-colonial format, is that we've never seen other people as enemies, you know? And and therefore the cosmopole, I think, ignores that and says, no, but we need to then be grafted into this post-colonial positionality, and therefore we too can prove that we can be something within that system. And then the cultural material, like this whole ideological analysis that is based on like images and signification, then becomes ways of forming this personality. We too can become blackness within this ideological landscape. I think it is a deep mistake. So I find him as a theory of the periphery. Like if you're a post-colonial subject and you're trying to figure out why it is that you can move within the colonial space, then you say, oh, therefore, clearly I understand Britishness. Clearly I understand Caribbean Britishness. Clearly I understand Kenyan Britishness. And therefore I must be somebody who can be black in that formation. But you are ignoring the fact that you're forming yourself out of the materials of the post-colony, when the relationship should be antagonistic, as Fanon says, which is the other direction, right? Fanon says, I do speak French, but the nature of the relationship by which I learned French is violent, so I have to be opposed to it. Right. So that's all I wanted to say.
All I can say is,
Now listen, that's called my boy.
so I appreciate it. And again, I to the extent I followed what you're saying, I agree and I appreciate it. And that speaks very much to what, and maybe better to what I was trying to say myself. And again, the only thing I would want to add to you and to everyone else is just again, a point of clarity and remembrance. I'm only talking today about this one essay from Stuart Hall. I never intended, this is not my review of his body of work. It is not my comment on him and his contribution. It was, again, Dr. Daphne Brooks asked me to review it in advance of hopefully of a conversation about her class on Beyonce at Yale. And yeah, so that's it. So I was only responding to this one essay. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. And join us
Yeah,
anytime.
thank you for having me, and keep on going. I listen to you every morning. So much love.
Right on. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the support. And by the way, everybody, please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, blackliberationmedia.org. Thank you for all of that. Appreciate you, Musa, for joining us, and shout out to the diaspora. Have you heard or seen of the film on Goebbels and the Fuhrer? I ask because I know a lot of your work is about propaganda. No, I have not seen. Is this new? I mean, I've seen previous documentaries, read a couple articles about it, but no. If this is new, I have not. So salute, and please do email or post any links. All right, Sith, let's try again. Are you there? Uh-oh. So I'm not doing any, I don't see any mic link hooked up on your so that's maybe why we don't hear you. All right, we'll give it another go here in a second. But I think, folks, I'm not sure. I think so. Ear Doctor is going to be on tomorrow with the remix. I think there's going to be some breaks being taken on the platform. But I have wanted to say that so I'll say it this way: if your engagement with me once a week, Monday mornings on I Mix What I Like for Black Liberation Media, on Saturdays with Renee, throughout the remix week when I'm on, if that's enough for you, cool. And just stay right here, continue to support the platform, the Patreon, all that other stuff. However, if you do want or can tolerate more of me in my work, please do check out the I Mix What I Like channel. The link's in the show description. More content will be showing up over there that goes beyond the work here. So please do that as well. And but feel free if this is all you could tolerate of Jared. I get it. No harm, no foul. At least support here. But if you do want a little bit more, please do swing on over and add some of the content over there. And I appreciate you, Rao. I appreciate you. But from myself to my wife to several others, sometimes enough is enough. All right, Sid, I don't think we could work it out. I don't know if you want to put the comment or the question in the chat and give that a shot. Appreciate you, Strin. Appreciate you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. I think, Sith, are we trying again? Hold on, who's here? Yeah. All right, Sith, let's give it a shot.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Now I hear an echo.
Okay,
But,
you hear an echo?
Yeah.
What?
But when I talk, so I won't talk, but you go ahead and say what you got to say.
No, I was just going to say, like, what you're describing about Stuart Hall, about the essentialism of Blackness. I noticed that, like, amongst Black high school students, they kind of like embody that same type of Black essentialism too. Like, Blackness can only be like one way and one way of being, but like that Blackness is deeply informed by like messages that they hear from mainstream media. And so I was just wondering, like, how is that kind of connected to like what you were saying about the Coonage thing? That's one. And I'm also wondering if Afro pessimism could be centered as a pedagogy, right? In order to disrupt the ways in which Blacks themselves are policing themselves in Blackness, but it's still like a colonial force, right? So I'm not too sure if I'm formulating like a question or if it's just like a statement there, but I've been running into those same kind of observations, you know, in the youth work that I do here in my city. So yeah, so basically, I'm just taking everything that you were talking about today and just centering on the work that I do just around like pedagogy and curriculum. But yeah, I don't know. This is just something I was thinking about. Someone said my volume's too high or something. I don't know.
Your volume sounds good to me, but I am going to mute you because I think because you don't have headphones on, there's feedback when I'm talking. So I'm just going to mute you while I'm responding. Working backwards, because now I might have to have you. So okay. I don't know about how to use Afro pessimism, and I struggle. You know, I enjoy the work. I support Frank's work, but I don't know. You know, for instance, his book Red, White, and Black, I found it to be damn near impenetrable. So I don't know how people would use it, which is a book of his critique of film, including some Black film, including of Sankofa. But it's dense. I found it very difficult. So I don't know how that would work particularly for high schoolers, but in terms of where I find an overlap from my own perspective to Afro pessimism that I find valuable to even my Vernon philosophy approach is really just to say, let's be realistic. For most of us, we're not going to have the willpower or the surrounding political context to avoid the damaging media environment entirely, so that we should engage it with higher levels of criticism, especially when we like something, and understand the context in which this media environment is created, and to the extent it does encourage anti-Blackness, anti-Africanness, a retrograde, if any, form of Pan-Africanism, and so on and so on. We should. That's, I think, how we should engage as pedagogy. The piece about performance, one of the articles I showed the point that was made when they referenced one of the historians is a point that I've been making and a form of and borrowing from Fanon and others for a long time, which is that, yes, I remember doing it myself. As a kid, I was even aware of it at one point. So I'm sure it was even more happening to more of us unconsciously, if it had risen to the level of consciousness to me as a teenager, that was trying to mimic the version of Black male youth that I thought I was supposed to exhibit based on what I was seeing in TV and video. And what the point was being made earlier, and what I've come to understand as an adult, is that the versions of Blackness that we get, yes, they may reflect a reality, but the versions we're getting are the versions selected from forms of reality by white owners of the means of production for white affluent audience members to enjoy, that then does get mimicked by Black audiences to perform in real life, and then used by the state as an excuse to treat Black people for real in a negative way. And then they can say, well, look, and it always reminds me that, I don't know if people remember this, but it's in a different context, but years ago when Dick Cheney was on one of these, and when he was caught citing a New York Times headline to justify his desire to invade Iraq that he had given to the New York Times. So he gives them a headline, they can produce it, then he can reference it as justification for what he wanted to do from the beginning. And in terms of identity, I'm arguing the same thing happens here. A white elite project a version of Blackness that they find comfortable, that they can then use to justify, that Black people will then mimic, that can be then used to justify Black abuse. So this is why I'm saying and I know because particularly as youngsters or really anybody who's not, and even when, and again, I keep bringing up the American fiction example, then I will stop here and let you respond. That even me supposedly studying it, like we want to see ourselves and we can be easily tricked. So when I see something that reflects something of my experience, if I'm not being immediately vigilant enough, I get tricked by it and I get brought in to accepting the presentation of my life that I then want to emulate, that then is used to justify an abuse of me. So we have to become more critical and engage critically and encourage people to engage critically. And to the extent that you can work in an Afro-pessimist approach, I don't think it does any harm. I think I just don't know that you could use Frank's works directly for that. But then put into and then put in conversation with other forms of approaches. I think it becomes very helpful. All right, Sith, go ahead.
Hopefully I'm not echoing or anything. But no, I do like that. You actually do kind of confirm what myself and other high school teachers are thinking, just using, of course, like Afro-pessimism as like a form of critique, right? To see how the forms of anti-Blackness even shows up in their schooling experience and how they're receiving these messages even from multimedia. Because I mean, it's just like one of those things that we're really trying to disrupt in our classroom, right? It's just like Blackness is kind of a singularity, but everyone experiences like Blackness differently based on their gender, their class, and things like that. But the ways that I've been working with Afro-pessimism in terms of pedagogy is just seeing that as like you seeing that as like the base, right? Like the reason why these oppressions are happening, yes, it's because of capitalist exploitation, but at its base that there is this thing of anti-Black racism, right? So, and there's a lot of different avenues that goes into there. A lot of students have been asking questions about the deeper things, but anyways, no, I just really do like the schema that you did have before in our talk, like being African in America versus African American. So I really did like that. So I'm definitely gonna rock with that. But shoot, bro, you should be on my committee, man. I'm struggling, bro. Like, you have you got really great ideas. I can admit that I'm different in the chat, but I just love these different spaces because in my doctoral program, like we're not getting any kind of like Africana critical studies at all. So I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing here. I don't have much to respond to what you're saying, but I think you definitely gave me a lot to think on, especially as winter break is approaching. So yeah, that's really it, Dr. Ball. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And send me an email. I could, if you want, we could talk about the committee work. I won't make any promises, but I'm open to the idea. If you want to follow up, please send me an email. I mix what I like at gmail.com is sufficient. But yeah. All right, good people. Are there any other? I think we can wrap here, right? And I appreciate those who came through today. I appreciate it. And those who will see and hear this later, I appreciate that too. Yeah, I enjoyed this. And hopefully there will be more discussions. I was just checking my email to see if there's any response yet. Hasn't been much time. So there should be more time from Professor Brooks to respond. I hope she does, because again, I'm certainly not an expert in Stewart Hall. So no, I appreciate you all too. Thank you very much. Yeah, I must be an Afro pessimist because I have no Afro. Exactly. All right, everybody, please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, support blackliberationmedia.org. Make sure you have your notifications on so you don't miss anything. It's been a great morning. The really the only way I could think of starting a work week or a Monday morning or even a vacation. What better way could you spend a morning than here and with the chat? It's great. But all right. Thanks, everybody. Peace only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll check you next time here. Oh, I was going to say something else. I'm forgetting. Anyway, I'll catch you next time right here at
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm. Kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.